This video today is how to make a Christmas tree cape for a small dog. First thing you need is some kind of template. Now in this case what I'm using is an old tree skirt. This tree skirt I checked out with the dog and it's about the right size and about the right height. Check it's basically a semicircle, and I'll have a copy of this or a printable photo of this in the web link at the bottom below. Now the next thing you do is you lay out your fabric. Now in this case the fabric I have isn't wide enough to make the whole skirt out of just one single piece of fabric. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take a piece of fabric and get it into a square shape. So you see I'm laying it out on my template to get it about the right width, the right size, as wide as I can make it to fit the curve. So I've got it as wide as I can and I'm going to cut it square. Now if you see, I made a little snip in the fabric and then I pulled the fabric to get a nice, even, straight cut. Alright, now I got a piece of fabric that is about the right size. But how do I get it to fit the shape? So with a curve, one way of achieving that is you take your fabric and you cut it on the diagonal. There we go, there's a diagonal. Then I'm going to lay each triangle on the template until it about covers the template. Now in this case, I have a little bit of space left that isn't quite covered by the template. You can see it up there at the top. So in order to do that, I'm going to cut one more piece of fabric onto that section to cover it off. So I got a little space left to fill, so I'm going to use this last piece of fabric to just fill it up and make sure that my template is completely covered by my shapes of fabric. From there, I'm going to sew the three shapes together until I have a template that fully covers the area. Next step is to trim it to size. So taking our fabric and putting it now on the bottom, laying the template on the top, now it's time to carefully trim. Now you'll notice that sometimes my template and my material don't quite perfectly match. And the truth is, at the end of the day, close is good enough. This is something that can be custom fitted to the dog, depending on where you place your ribbon at the end and how you complete your sizing. So you don't want to overwork it. You'll notice I'm not using any pins. I'm not using any really good way of sort of holding down the bottom to the template, because, you know, frankly, for a single layer of fabric, it's really not that hard. So as long as you're careful, you have a nice flat surface and a good pair of scissors, you can get it pretty close to where you need to get to, and it'll work out just fine. So here it is, all trimmed up, and I'm going to take my template off and have a look at how my fabric does. Because I used triangles, the seams that I had to sew because my fabric wasn't large enough don't really stand out as being all that noticeable or strange, because they follow the line of the fabric or the line of the shape. So now I've taken my piece of fabric and I've turned it over so that the rough side is facing up. And I've had a look at some of the things that I want to match it with in order to make my finished product. I have some pom-poms and I have some liner fabric. The advantage of using a liner fabric is that it makes it a lot more efficient in terms of completing the project. You're going to have to finish the seams around the edges somehow, so by putting in a liner you can simply sew the two sides together, flip them inside out, and then you've got a nice completed project. I've laid my liner fabric out underneath my finished top side of my cape to get a sense of how much fabric I'm going to need. Again, I've cut the fabric down so that it's large enough to fit. In this case, the liner fabric is much larger or wider than my original cape fabric, so I only need one piece. I don't have to piece it together this time. So now I'm laying it out, getting a sense of how it's going to fall, and then I'll take my scissors and I'll trim. The trick to trimming the liner fabric is to be generous. Rather than spend a lot of time trying to pin it and make it perfect, it's easier to just cut it close. So I'll leave half an inch of edge around the outside, just in case the way I've laid it out isn't totally perfectly flat, or something shifts or something else happens. After I've sewed the two sides together, I can always trim it down so they're both exactly the same size. So there you have it. I have two pieces of fabric. I've put the good sides in for both the liner and the top side, and I'm going to take my sewing machine and sew all the way around the outside, leaving a gap of about a hand's width or 5 or 6 inches that will allow me to flip it inside out. Here I am flipping it inside out using that gap in the sewing that goes around, and you'll see once it's flipped inside out, I'll stick my hand in and I'll make sure that the corners and the edges are pushed out as far as they reasonably can be. Once I get that general shape, then I'll take it up to the iron and give it a really good pressing. As much as I skip steps around pinning and measuring, a good pressing can make a big difference in how the final product looks. So here it is. I've given it a good press, and now I've top stitched all the way around the perimeter, including the area that I had previously left open. I tucked it under and pressed it with the iron really well, so when I top stitched it, it was sealed shut. Now what I have is a top side and a bottom side ready to go. I took it and measured it on my dog to get the height right, and I folded down the top part of the template to create a collar. From there, I'm going to take some ribbon, and I'm going to sew it around the neckline of the collar and leave some ribbon hanging down on both sides so that it can be tied up in the front. What you'll see here is I've had a chance to take my ribbon and I've sewed it along the neckline in a straight line. When it fits around the dog, it fits quite comfortably. And I've already taken this and tested it on my dog to make sure that the size is right, he's not going to trip or be uncomfortable. Next step is I take my pom-poms to create the decorations. You could use pom-poms, you can use zigzag, ric-rac, whatever suits your fancy at this point that you'll think make decorative looking Christmas ornaments. I'm always careful not to choose things that the dog might want to chew or swallow or ingest. Every dog's different. Mine is not very interested in pom-poms, so I'm able to use those knowing that he's not going to be bothered with them. You can put your pom-poms on in a few different ways. You could use a hot glue gun, which would be very simple and quick, but personally I don't really like the look, so I tend to sew them on. Now in this case, I looked at a couple different color of pom-poms. The Christmas colors I thought would be more traditional, but I like the look of these colorful pom-poms, and I've pulled out one yellow pom-pom to be the star on top of the tree, and I'll make a headband for the dog separate from that. My preference for attaching pom-poms is to sew them on. It's quick, it's easy, and it's very, very secure. So I've laid them out, not particularly with any effort or order, and now I'm going to take my needle and my thread and I'm going to sew them on. When I sew on things like pom-poms, I usually use 2 pieces of thread. In other words, I put the thread through the needle and double it all the way back to the beginning, and then tie a knot that knots the 2 ends of the thread together. Then when I start my stitch, I loop it through the fabric so that it's quick and secure. I don't like having to go back and do things twice. So what I'll do is I'll find my first spot, loop my needle through, create a loop. There we go. It's nice and secure. It's not going to go anywhere. Push it right through the center of the pom-pom. It seems to hold them on very securely. And then bring it down through the thread again. Then I'm going to run the needle between the 2 layers of fabric and bring it out in another random location to sew on another pom-pom. I don't use interface between the 2 layers on something like this because it's just a quick project and it doesn't need to be permanent for all time, but it also enables me to do things like this, use the needle as a runner between the 2 layers and speedily be able to put on the pom-poms. This is just supposed to be a quick project, so I'm not aiming for complete permanence, but I also want to ensure that things are on securely, they're not going to fall off, and I'm not going to have to go back and fix it later. So I put in as much effort as I need to make sure that I have a secure binding project. You'll see I've already put on 3 pom-poms. I think this is number 4, and this is not sped up in any way. It's just a very efficient way of securing something like a pom-pom to a project like this. Okay, so I spent about 20 minutes putting on pom-poms, and it really wasn't very hard. And now I have all the pom-poms on. I have my ribbon also completed on the outside, and my project is basically done. All I need to do from here is fold the collar down and make sure everything is nice and secure. I haven't missed any pom-poms. I'm not going to have things falling around. And you'll see I've also completed the hat. So that's a piece of ribbon with one of the large yellow pom-poms on top, like the star on the top of a tree. So here it is all together, one Christmas tree cape and pom-pom hat. Enjoy!